moving on with our season, I guess, in Psalm 23. We're going to look at verse 4 in particular this week. I thought, given that we've been reading different translations, we might hit the one a lot of our members would know, which is the King James Version. So I might just read that and then we'll kick into the sermon. So, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I'll fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. That's probably the version that you would know more than the other ones. It's the one that tends to get read at funerals and things like that. And this morning, I really do want to talk a little bit about life in the valley. It's interesting, isn't it? Mountains have a certain romantic quality to them. We look at mountain tops and we look at ranges, and there's something in them that call to us. We want to scale those mountains. We want to get to the top because there's a mystique about them. We love the view from the summit. Those endless vistas that make you feel like you can see the whole world from up there. Most of you would know that I love watching cycling. I love watching the Tour and the Giro and those things. I love watching little guys go up mountains really, really quickly on a bike. It's the mountain stages that get me every time. They're the ones that tempt me to stay up till stupid hours of the night watching these guys go up them, particularly things like the Alpe d'Huez and stuff like that, which are just iconic climbs. It's interesting, it gets me that within the Tour, these mountain stages run at 180 k's, give or take. There's only 20 k's that are climbing. The rest of it is time in the valley, getting to the mountains, and then they go up these mountains. And I think that's the thing for us too. For all the mystique of the mountains, we spend so much more time in the valleys in life. And I think David knew this. We don't know exactly when David wrote this psalm. I read an article actually yesterday that offered 4 different possibilities. They said, look, there are 4 different potential times when David wrote this psalm. Maybe it was written as a young shepherd when he was out looking after his sheep and he saw these parallels and wrote them down, and I thought, well, that's fair enough. And then the article said, well, one of the other possibilities is when he was fleeing Saul, so he knew what it was to be walking through the valley of the shadow of death. Well, yeah, that could be right too. And then they said that the third possibility is that he wrote it when it was early in his kingship and he was reflecting on God's care for him there and his responsibilities to the nation. And I thought, okay, that's 3. And then they said the 4th one was, it's possible he wrote it as an old man looking back. And I thought, well, that covers just about everything, all of his life, and so what we gather is that he wrote it at some point in his life, but we just don't know when. More important than when David wrote this psalm is why David wrote this psalm. See, David knew the mountaintops of life, but he also walked the valleys, the kind of valleys with shadows big enough to swallow him whole. Whenever it was written, Psalm 23 wasn't written from a place of comfort. It was written out of lived experience. And David knew valleys, both literal and metaphorical. And yet, even there, he writes, even though I walk through the darkest valley, I'll fear no evil, for you're with me. And notice what David doesn't say there. He doesn't say, if I walk through the valley. He doesn't say, when I find the right prayer, I'll avoid the valley. He says, even though I walk through the valley. See, valleys are part of life, even for those who walk closely with God. And yet, like a good shepherd, Jesus doesn't abandon us in the valleys there. He doesn't drive us into those places and lead us to fend for ourselves. He walks beside us. He protects us. And his presence makes all the difference when we find ourselves in those valleys. Now the Hebrew word here is salmavath. It just means deep shadow or shadow of death. And it's not just, these valleys are not just about dying, those moments when we confront our own mortality. It's about the seasons that we go through, seasons of fear or uncertainty, pain or loss. When we walk through those times in life where it feels like the walls are closing in a little bit, where the shadows are dark and a little bit threatening, where we can't see what's around us, and so we're kind of feeling that tension of, am I safe here? David's not naive when he writes. He knows fear. He knows betrayal. He knows danger and grief. But he also knows this. God doesn't always keep us from the valley, but he always keeps us in it. He looks after us in it. Keeps us safe in it. See, the thing is, I think, the way we think about our lives, we all want the green pastures and the still waters of verse 2. But beneath every hill lies a valley. And the ancient shepherds, they knew this stuff. To reach the good grasslands in the high country, you had to go through the lower places. Phil Keller, who I've referenced a lot during this series, he was a real shepherd. He reflected on Psalm 23 and he said that the valleys were the paths to higher ground. And that's just as true for sheep as it is for us. Or just as true for us as it is for sheep. That's a better way of putting it. Keller wrote this. He said, the shepherd knows from past experience that predators like coyotes, bears, wolves or cougars can take cover in the broken cliffs and from their vantage point prey on the flock. The shepherd knows these valleys can be subject to sudden storms and flash floods and send walls of water rampaging down the slopes. The shepherds know that in the valleys there are dangers of rock slides, mud, or a dozen other natural disasters that can destroy or injure the sheep. But in spite of such hazards, he also knows that this is still the best way to take his flock to the high country. And he spares himself no pain or trouble to keep an eye out for any danger that might develop. And I think this is where the parallels come when we find ourselves in the valley, whatever that looks like. God hasn't abandoned us there. God is keeping us there. God is keeping watch over us in those places, despite what it feels like. See, God doesn't lead us into valleys to harm us. He leads us through them to grow us, to draw us close, to mature us, and to set us up for the journey ahead. And I think one of the things that is remarkable with this psalm is that God is no longer ahead of us. He's beside us. God is not just leading us down paths of righteousness. He walks beside us. David shifts, there's a tone in the nature of the psalm. If you go back and have a look at it, you can see it. But in the first sort of 3 verses, David talks about God in third person a lot. The Lord is my shepherd. He leads me. He does this. He makes me lie down. All that sort of stuff. Verse 4 marks a transition point, and all of a sudden it gets real personal. You are beside me. Your rod and staff comfort me. You prepare a table for me. All of that stuff. And I think the reason that happens is because we're more prone to talk about God when we're in the green pastures We're prone to talk to God or with God when we're in the ravine. See, in the light we wander, and in the dark we tend to cling. David changes it's like the tone changes from comments about God to communion with God. And this time in the valley is the catalyst that brings that change. And I think the reason for that is because it's in the valley where David learned intimacy. It's in the valley where he learned to keep his eyes on the shepherd. See, the valley of life is where theology becomes intimacy. It's where what we believe becomes who we trust. Easy to come up with a whole lot of propositional statements when you're in a good, easy place. It's the valley that drives us to relationship. And that's why David can say, I will fear no evil. Not because evil isn't real, but because God is present. There's a guy, I came across the story a couple of weeks back, a bloke called Kenneth Wilson, who's an author from, I reckon, I'm going to say the late 60s, early 70s. He's already popped up in a book on prayer. And he tells this story of his childhood. He lived in Pittsburgh in this 3-story house, and the bottom level was like a cellar, that kind of idea. The middle level was often rented out to help pay the rent. And then he and his family had all their bedrooms up on the top floor. And the top floor had a kind of haunted house vibe. There were high arched windows. There were all sorts of weird geometric shapes in the ceilings and all of that sort of stuff. And Kenneth Wilson was the youngest in the family, which meant, much to his horror, he had to go to bed first. He had to go to bed in this distant, creaky room full of strange noises. And he wrote it this way, he said it this way, he said, that bed in that room on the 3rd floor seemed to be at the end of the earth. It was remote from human habitation, close to unexplained noises and dark secrets. Sometimes my father would read me a story, but eventually he'd turn out the light and shut the door, and I would hear his footsteps fade away down the stairs. Then all would be quiet, except for the rattling windows and my cowering imagination. And he said, once I remember, and he talks about how there was this routine, he'd try and get his dad to put matchsticks into the windows to stop the windows rattling and try and figure out all the shadows in the room and all that sort of stuff. And eventually one night his dad said to him, would you rather I leave the light on and go downstairs, or turn the light out and stay with you for a while? And Kenneth Wilson said he didn't hesitate. He said, I chose presence with darkness over absence with light. And I think that's most what we want in our valleys. I think that's a really profound statement. When we go through the valley, what we want is the assurance that someone's there with us. And the truth of the gospel is that there is no valley, no matter how dark, that you walk through alone. God goes with you. The Good Shepherd does that journey with you. See, the great promise of the shepherd is not that we won't face evil, but that we don't have to fear it, because he's with us. God doesn't promise us the absence of darkness. He promises the presence of his presence. And that makes the difference. Just as a shepherd stays close to defend his sheep, God promises his nearness in the places where we need him most. And in Jesus, the Good Shepherd, that promise takes flesh. He walks through his own valley, the shadow of the cross, so that no valley of ours would ever be walked alone again. David says, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Two kinds of instruments for two kinds of danger. So the rod was a defensive weapon. It was a 2-foot oak club with a rounded heart and head. made from knotholes out of tree, knots out of tree. It was used to strike back at predators and protect the flock. It's a picture of the shepherd's power, his ability to defend the sheep. And David is saying he's got no fear in adversity because of the comfort of God's power protecting him from what would destroy him. And you don't have to have that fear either. Greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world. The other instrument David mentions is the staff. And by contrast, the staff is a tool of care. With its curved crook, a shepherd can guide, correct, or lift the fallen sheep back to safety. And just a gentle tap was enough to bring a wandering lamb back to the fold. David found comfort in knowing that God was guarding his steps, that he would make it through the darkness safely. What he's pointing to is this idea that God both protects us and directs us. And we need those things both, especially when the shadows grow long. Charles Spurgeon put it this way. He said that there is no night too dark for the shepherd's eye, no valley too deep for his reach. And that's true of your life. The comfort of the rod and the staff isn't in their shape, but in whose hands they are. And that makes the difference. The presence of his presence. Now, perhaps you're walking through some of that stuff today. There's a diagnosis looming. There's a relationship that's ended. There's a loneliness that's getting heavy. Maybe you're grieving someone you loved, and their absence is a valley you didn't choose, but you have to walk through. This psalm reminds us that you do not walk alone. Our good shepherd doesn't send us into the valley, he walks there with us. And he walks with purpose. There's an old hymn that's called Shepherd of My Soul. It says this, it says, Shepherd of my soul, quiet the noise around me. Lead me beside your still waters. Restore me when I'm cast down. Teach me to rest in you. That's the heart cry of this passage. Cry not just for safety, but for presence. Just one other thought. What if Psalm 23 isn't only about comfort? We often read it at times when we need comfort, but what if it's not just about that? What if it's about courage? Because it takes courage to keep walking through the darkest valleys, even with God beside us. To look at the shadows and think, no, I'm going to trust the shepherd. It takes courage sometimes to help someone else take one more step. I think in those times we need to remember the valley is not the destination. It's part of the journey, but it's not the end of the journey. The shepherd leads through it, onward, upward, to places where our soul can breathe again and lie down in green pastures. There's the movie The Voyage of the Dawn Treader. Do you know that one? It's one of the Chronicles of Narnia ones. Right? There's a little mouse that's like it's a knight, it's a noble mouse if you like. Its name is Reepicheep. And it knows that hardship often prepares an ordinary person for an extraordinary destiny. Well, I think that's true of faith too. And it's the journey through the valleys is part of God preparing us for eternity. Part of God preparing us for whatever life holds next. And so wherever you are today on that journey, in those cycles that we've talked about, remember, God is not only near, God is present with you. And his rod and his staff, they not only protect you, but they guide your steps. And one day, you will look back on the valley and you will realise that the shepherd never left you. not for a single moment. And the darkness didn't win, and the shadows didn't overcome. And he journeyed with you through those things. So my encouragement for you this morning is trust him, even when the shadows seem long, because the shepherd who protects you will also bring you safely home and bring you through. Why don't we pray for a minute, and then Belinda and the team will come up and close our service. Shepherd of our souls, you know the valleys we walk through today. You know the paths that our lives have taken. You see the shadows that linger and the fears that whisper in the dark. The places where grief and loss weigh heavy on our hearts. But Lord, also, we thank you this morning that you don't leave us there alone. You walk beside us, your rod to defend, your staff to guide. And so, Lord, this morning we ask that you would be near the brokenhearted, that you would quiet the anxious mind, that you would give courage to the weary and restore the one who feels cast down. And would you lead us, Lord, step by step, on the paths of righteousness for your name's sake. In Jesus' name. Amen.